Hello and welcome to the AI Show, brought to you by Lenovo. I'm your host, Emily Barrett, and I'm thrilled to be your guide into the fascinating world of artificial intelligence. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the AI universe, exploring the latest innovations, the people behind them, and how these technologies are shaping our future. On this episode, we'll be joined by Martin, who I'll be discussing contact centers with. So let's begin as we take you on your journey through the world of AI. So, hi Martin, thank you very much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
I really appreciate it. Do you want to start by introducing yourself and just telling us a little bit about your background and where you're from?
Yeah, sure. I'm Martin Taylor. So I've been in the tech industry for worryingly 30 years. So since 1993, when I was more or less a new graduate. But I suppose my career in tech started probably when I was about 10 and started writing games. It's the kind of classic evolution, isn't it? Gamer to coding to then business. So for the last about 18 years now, I've been developing this Content Guru business, which is part of our Redwood Technologies group. And Content Guru is all about cloud-based contact center and customer experience. And that's really what's led me here today, because we're seeing a lot of AI now arriving into contact center. It's already causing some fundamental and very positive change in the industry, and I'm delighted to come and talk about it.
So that we can get an understanding of what that change and what that shift is looking like, do you want to describe a little bit about what that contact center looked like pre-AI?
Yeah, I think we've all got a kind of vision of what a contact center is. A big warehouse, big shed, hundreds of people wearing headsets, talking on phones, looking into screens. That model's been there for a good 35 or so years now, so very well established. And if you think about it, what a contact center is there for, it's to bring together knowledge and skills into one place where, at scale, an organization, or even multiple organizations, can communicate with the public. So our role in that isn't to sit in the chairs wearing the headsets. We're very much about the technology that's driving these things, so the bit that the public communicate with. So if we think now, it's not just calls. It used to be a call center. There's calls, there's emails, texts, there's IM, there's WhatsApp, and so on. Many, many different methods through which organizations and the public communicate, whether they're businesses or parts of government or healthcare systems. Our role is to manage that demand, so bringing in the calls, taking in the emails, dealing with them, reading them, whatever it needs to be, and then, where appropriate, we're connecting these specialists in these contact centers to deal with the public and to serve them in various forms. Could be any kind of transaction, really. And so you can see there's a lot of inbuilt automation already, and it's a very digitalized space to begin with, and that's in some ways why it's the kind of perfect ground for AI to take root.
Yeah, and what you've just described does sound what you envision as the perfect place for AI to take hold, because you've got that digitalized environment, you've got people who are already looking for automation within their day-to-day lives and workplaces. So how do you see AI changing how things look?
Yeah, well, contact centers been using earlier forms of AI for many years. Probably the most prominent of the general purpose technologies has been natural language processing. So over the last few years, you've probably noticed, if you interact with organizations, you can speak much more naturally now, moving away from that press 1, press 2, what was called IVR, into a more dialogue-based approach. So that natural language processing is a key building block of AI and a feeder into the newer generations of generative AI. So one great example here in London, where we're sat, in the NHS and the health system here, when you call the 111 urgent care line, for the last year or so, we've had a question before you go into the queue as to why you're calling today. And so we've gathered millions and millions of those utterances. And then a piece of AI work that then followed was to take those and then, using various AI methodologies, to produce categorizations of why everybody is calling, we came up with about 100 or so reasons people call that service, plus about another 80 which are paediatric. Then once we've converted all these different ways of expressing the demand into vectors, and then using cosine similarity, we can then compare one utterance with another, see if this is the same as that. And then the next step is, of course, connecting that person with the right service. And so we're able to be a lot more nuanced now that there are 100 ways in past the front door rather than just one. So that's just one of many, many examples where we're already applying these sorts of techniques within the contact center, but using those building blocks of previous generations of AI.
And it sounds like what effectively you're doing is creating the options for a far more personalised and far more efficient service for people to use, because you're not having to go through loads of different triage questions in whatever environment to direct you the correct way.
Exactly. So we've experienced these sorts of services where it's one size fits all. You've hurt your foot and now you're being asked about whether you're having a stroke, because that's what the quite primitive algorithm dictates must be asked. So all those questions must be asked. AI gives us that much more individualistic approach. We already know that you've stubbed your toe and you're worried about it. Now we can get straight into a directed dialogue about that specific problem, and probably bringing in a resource, a medical resource that is appropriate for helping you, and maybe cutting one or two stages out of the process, which of course also saves money. And contact centres have been about nothing if they haven't been about efficiency. And that's why they were created in the first place. And it's always been a very controlled workplace, monitoring of every second of activity from the person working there, known as the agent, to how long people are spending in queues, what are they doing while they're there. So that measurement has already been happening, and that's why it's just an easy plug-in now to add some of these new capabilities. And
obviously contact centres are fairly broad-ranging across multiple industries. We've talked about healthcare, but healthcare providers are not the only people using contact centres.
No.
It goes across the vast majority of verticals will be using contact centres in some way, shape or form. Do you see that there are any particular industries that are faster at adopting this than others, or some that are more ready for it?
Yeah, most definitely. It's those with the most data and the best data, really. Because the first step is organising your data. It's measuring what's actually going on, and then creating consistent data from that. And then AI is really about processing that data and doing things with it. So if we think of something like insurance, the insurance industry has been a massive collector of data for decades. That's how it does all of the calculations of actuarial science and so on, the calculations of risk. So they have lots of data about not just the customers, but also about behaviour within websites, about claims type of behaviour, and they're able to quite readily map those on to AI processes. And they are also a sector that is always in search of greater efficiencies as well.
And I think what you've just said there about data being so important is something that we do need to pay a bit of attention to, right? Because without the data, you have no insights. And I think what AI can provide you, and different types of AI can provide you with, is the ability to process that data more quickly, more efficiently than what you or I or anybody else might be able to do. So as well as using AI in terms of how end users get in touch with this, with these contact centres, are you also using AI to help the agents provide information back to people who are getting in touch with the contact centres?
Primarily that, actually. When ChatGPT came out at the end of November 22, seems like a long time ago now.
Doesn't it?
I was fielding a lot of calls within days, actually, of some of these contact centre operators thinking, right, how many of these agents can I replace? Can we just, as it were, talk to the hand now, the hand of the machine? Very quickly, we realised that wasn't really going to be the best way to go about this. And what we did find was that actually the agents and how they work, although very efficient in the scheme of workplaces, there were still many friction losses that were going on across the piece, regardless of which industry you're in. So if you think about a call, and it could equally be for any of the written forms of communication, before the call, we talked about why are you calling before you go into the queue. So we know kind of what you want, what sort of resource, perhaps what sort of queue we need to send you into. Is there any information that we can give you right now? Do we need to collect more information about an existing case, for example? Perhaps we can serve up that information and then you can be on your way, which is the case for many of these callers. So before the call, a lot we can do to sort, prepare. Maybe we can use an on-screen app, not even an app now, it's just a link on an SMS to a portal. You fill in perhaps your name and address, a date of birth, some of these sorts of pieces of information a human would otherwise need to collect. So we're preparing for that human to take over and have a more focused call and less needless questioning. Then during the call, of course, what used to be called knowledge management, now really it's about RAG, retrieval augmented generation. So you've got a foundation model really that's serving up the next thing to talk about based on listening to the conversation. And when agents are trained, which is typically about a 3-month process, a lot of what they're learning is where to find all this stuff, tabbing around between different systems. So much easier, it's just presented there as we go along. So we're not only reducing training time and the associated cost, we're also making even a quite new contact center agent much more capable, more as if they've been there for some months. We can also be transcribing the call as we go along, so noting down everything that's being said by the two parties, and then at the end we can be producing a summarization of that, so which can go into the record. So perhaps next time there's a call, rather than listening to and reviewing a whole call, let's just look at 50 or 100 words about what that was about, and maybe that's already defined there. So during the call, there's a lot we can do. We're experimenting with machine translation right now, for example, cutting down on the need in many cases to find that human translator with all the associated time that takes and the extra cost, of course. And then afterwards, things like the customer satisfaction survey, we can already kind of know how that went. Did it go well? Was this agent very empathetic? Were they a bit machine-like? Let's get those coaching notes out there, score the call, and get it ready for audit as well. So let's get the supervisors spending more time with the agents, helping them, training them, rather than looking for 10 different types of recording for this month, for this particular type of human agent. So a lot of the ways there of making not just the agent, but everyone around them more efficient. Clinicians, for example, they spend about 40% of their time on average transcribing, noting things down, typing away. You see it if you go into a GP appointment, for example, or in police, these 101 call handlers, they're spending 60% of their time typing things up. That is low-hanging fruit, very low-risk ways. We can make that super efficient by doing all of that preparation while things are happening, rather than doing it all manually afterwards. And until you've done all of those efficiency savings and you've implemented all of these techniques, there's really no need to direct the person to talk to a machine. We're not at that level yet.
Yeah, there are definitely other ways that you can look to create efficiencies. And I do think that, when I call a contact centre, I don't want to speak to a machine. I want to speak to a person generally. So I think there's a element there of what do your end users, what do your customers want, rather than how much money can we save all the time? Because will people leave you and go to the competition?
Yeah, always the threat.
Yeah.
And actually, these are the kind of conversations, but in a different form. If we think back to the .com era that we were having then, people were saying, can we call deflect? Let's stop them calling, let's hide the phone number, make them go on the web, make them do it all themselves, regardless of what we call the customer effort score. What we're able to do now is, if they want to call, and in over 80% of cases, people will call if they think it's important or emotive, and often it's both. So they're going to call. So having accepted that fact of human behaviour, let's now make that a properly digitalised channel and put the intelligence in to support it. So we're meeting the consumer, citizen, patient on their own terms in the way they want to interact. And we're kind of hiding the clever technology in the background. All they see is this great personalised service that isn't creepy either. That's important too.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of my questions, is how much do you notify people of the fact that this technology is being used? Because obviously people want to know what's going on with their data, especially if calls are being recorded, or things are being used for then training of models. How do you help end users understand that?
Yeah, I mean, people, particularly since GDPR, are very mindful of their data, the value of it, the fact that it's got to be respectfully dealt with and processed in the right places. We don't want it going to perhaps North Korea, for example, even if that were the cheapest place to do that data processing, which it probably wouldn't be, but anyway. So data has to be absolutely respected. So it's not just about data sovereignty, but people want to know, where is the processing going on, what's happening to my data. They're aware that as the data subject, they are the data owner. It doesn't belong to these organizations. And that's a big shift to that .com era that I talked about before, where people would willy-nilly sell off a whole mailing list of their customers for money. And I remember talking with a retailer friend of mine when we were both in our 20s, and he said, I'm making as much money selling the mailing list as the products. That's just an unimaginable thing to even think now. And so it is, if you think back a year or so ago, everyone was very excited about ChatGPT. They go straight on, probably entering all their own details in. And then suddenly that came to a screeching halt, at least within organizations. In the recent survey, I think 63% of organizations are either banning people from doing that or putting very strict limits on, because they know that you can't just put your valuable data out there because it's out there forever. And in many of these large hyperscalers, the data is literally kept forever. So people don't want to overshare. They want the information that's necessary to be used for them. And actually, they want some transparency as well. So we all think of AI as quite black box processes. But actually, you can, in the modern, even generative AI, slow down the machine and actually show the workings, a bit like when you were doing your maths at school, showing your workings.
Don't just write the answer.
Yes. So this is how we arrived at the answer. And actually, that knowledge itself is one of the means of tackling the hallucination problem. So ultimately, trust is going to be key. And as contact center people working in that customer experience scene, not only do millions of people work in these places, but virtually the whole human population uses them. So we've got an absolute responsibility as one of the first places deploying AI to use it in a super responsible way that improves the service and doesn't creep people out.
Yeah, I'd agree with that statement. And it would be really interesting to know a little bit more around how you define what that responsible way is and how you do that evaluation process. Because obviously there are hundreds of things you could do with AI within your environment. So how do you choose what you do and what you don't do?
I think it's a question, again, of which models you want to use. So large language models are obviously much in vogue. Many people still think there's only one or two of those, but actually there are many. And there's one of the big GPU makers, graphics processing processor chip makers. They had a monthly review board to look at new LLMs, new large language models coming through. And then during last year, they had to make it into a weekly board. And now things are arriving midweek. So it's more than weekly now that a new LLM appears. And many of them are coming from the open source world, based on Llama and other standards, which means actually that you can choose to run those on your own cloud infrastructure. So it's possible to tightly control where that is happening, which data centers, which standards then apply in terms of data sovereignty, data protection processes. So choosing which models you're going to use for your customer data and which items of data you're going to process, and then what you're going to serve up to your contact center agents. What are they going to be able to see? And even going back nearly 3 years now for the UK census, our responsibility was to orchestrate all of the multiple systems of record of the Office of National Statistics here in the UK in order that our customer could provide the service contact centre for anyone with questions or changes to make to their form, but without actually serving up any of that data, but having a safe overlay over it. And that's what us and other tech companies like us have been doing for a few years now. So it's really an extension of these very careful processes of guarding customer data. And standards like SOC 2 Type 2 are ways of independently measuring how those data processes are being used, not only for organizations' data, but also critically for consumer data as well.
Yeah, it's really important that we have those processes in place. Before we start looking at introducing new technology, you need to make sure that what you're doing currently is being done well and being done properly and in a regulated fashion, right?
No one wants the Wild West here, do they?
No.
Not for very long, anyway.
Yeah, I think everybody's quite keen to create some form of regulation around what's going on currently within the technology industry, because there is a danger with it becoming the Wild West that things could go horribly wrong.
Absolutely. And actually, for once, the EU as a large institution has made some big strides there with the AI Act, the first real piece of legislation to really look in a holistic way, I think, at AI. And I rather like what they've done. Obviously, it's been only a few weeks since it passed through the European Parliament in Strasbourg with an absolutely huge majority. It's something like 533 to 46 or something. Almost unheard of level of unanimity, really, in how things should be done. So it's about a risk-based approach.
Yeah.
The top of the pyramid, stuff that's unacceptable, prohibited, such as, let me think now. Stuff that's prohibited, such as generic use of identity, subliminal processes. AI has the potential for subliminal processes to become a big factor, or social scoring. So social scoring where you could be permanently disadvantaged as a user of these services. So they've designed out some of the really bad stuff. Then we've got the two layers where industry is going to operate, the high risk and the low risk. So the high risk is things like medical decisioning, clinical decision support, quite rightly going to be looked at very closely. Lower risk, your normal chatbots. And then at the bottom, things like games, they're going to have AI in them. It's going to be very entertaining. There's probably going to be some interesting new tech will come out of that. But that's allowed to kind of flourish in an unregulated space. And crucially, of course, they've taken pure research and set that to one side so that people in labs can do research unfettered, provided it doesn't touch upon the real world. So I'm quite excited about the possibilities for that, like with GDPR, to set the kind of tone for evolving world standards. Obviously, in the US, they've got a couple of executive orders. There's the Biden one, and there's one from the last days of the Trump era as well. Those are then implemented through multiple different government agencies, but they've crucially looked at coordinating those so the heads of the agencies work together with industry as well. And they have, being America, a prosperity angle. So they want it to increase prosperity as well as be safe. So I'm very heartened that regulators, governments, parliaments are looking very seriously at this and trying to have it emerge in a responsible and useful way.
Well, thank you. I think that's been a really, really interesting conversation. So thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for watching this episode from wherever you are in the world. We hope you'll join us again.